Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Levinson, and this is actually two kinds of a conversation, or at least it's the same conversation, but it's going to be recorded, and you may be hearing it in one of two ways. First of all, this will be a video up on my YouTube channel, and I'll be publishing links to it all over the known and unknown universe. And then a few days later, it'll be the latest episode of a podcast I've been doing on and off since 2006, which is really absurd.
Wow.
20 years doing this podcast. And somehow it manages to stay relatively current. So some of you might not be seeing us, but if you are listening to the podcast and you really do want to see us, there will be a link in the show notes to the audio podcast, which, by the way, has a name, Light On, Light Through, and that link will bring you to this video. And what you are going to see and hear is a conversation between the four people that you're seeing at the top of the screen. As I just told you, I'm Paul Levinson. Right next to me is my wife, Tina Vozick,
Hello.
who insisted on keeping her original name.
Insisted on? It wasn't my original name, it was my name.
Oh, that's true. And then
It was a long time ago, but I never regretted it.
It's true. Right below us, but only below us in terms of these images, not in importance, is our Sarah Clarke Stuart, who is the author of the novel that we're going to be talking about, and her husband, Jonathan Oakes, who put up with Sarah's writing for God knows how many years, including most recently the audio book that Listen and Live was good enough to put out along with the Kindle paperback and hardcover book. And by the way, before our conversation ends, I'll make sure to put up a link in the chat in case anybody is desperate to get a copy of the novel or the podcast, although I have a feeling just about all the people here have already read the novel probably more than once. I also want to say hello, someone who just entered. We see it says Children's Learning Center. We figured we'd really make this a family affair, and that's Molly, our daughter, who actually...
The one who read The Plot to Save Socrates and
Yeah,
the best she ever read. That's the one.
Right, the Silk Code, not the Plot to Save Socrates.
Oh, the Silk Code, sorry.
Right. Yeah. Molly, I was just telling the story of how you read the manuscript of the Silk Code and you said, Dad, this is the best novel I ever read. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
No.
I still feel the same to this day.
Oh, good. So anyway, it's great to see everyone else here as well. And actually, I do want to mention Alexis Stuart is here with us, and she created the wonderful cover that you saw at least a large part of when you were in the waiting room for Song of the Unsung Mushroom. And we have some other people here. Edwin Stepp, we got a great blurb from him. Meghan Vickers, same thing, great blurb. Bud, what's Bud's last name?
Gundy.
What was that?
Gundy. Bud Gundy.
Bud Gundy, right. So when I was basically preparing this thing, I put you down as Bob Gundy. This is true. And Sarah corrected me and said Bud. And then I got so focused on Bud, I forgot about the Gundy. So you can see here what a great professor I am. I drive my students crazy with this. But let's begin our conversation. I first became acquainted with Sarah's work I guess about 15 years ago, when she published a really excellent book called Literary Lost. And then shortly after that, she published a book about Fringe, two all-time great television shows. So I knew that Sarah had something on the ball. I think I even wrote a blurb for, maybe it was Literary Lost. So and we've stayed in sort of disparate touch over the years. Maybe once or twice. Bumping into each other online. But this past summer, Sarah sent me an email and said that she had a novel that she was just finishing, and she wanted some advice about how to get that published. And as I talked to Sarah and as she told me what the novel was about, and being a really selfish person, I pretty quickly came to the conclusion that certainly the best thing for me and Tina, who run a small publishing company, Connected Editions, we'll talk more about that a little later, it would be a really good thing for our company. And I thought also for Sarah, if we actually published the book. But that's actually getting ahead of the story for people who are just listening to this for the first time or watching it. And so, Sarah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for Song of the Unsung Mushroom.
So its earliest origins are with Claire and Gunther. So those are the main characters of the story. And those originated with Alexis and bedtime stories. Alexis, who's here and who did the cover. And when she was really little, and these were bedtime stories that I just kind of created for both of my children, but they predated Isaac, who's my son, who's 19 now. And Alexis is his older sister. And so I had these characters. The novel is not a children's story necessarily. It can be for young readers, but the characters themselves have been around for a long time. And I would say that the protagonist, Claire, it was mostly about her because, like I said, it predated Isaac, who's my son. And once he was born, then Gunther kind of got a little bit more developed. But that's kind of these were stories. So the characters, I kind of developed over time for my children. And then during COVID, I kind of sat down and I thought, I want to write a Claire and Gunther story, which is what I would call them when I said, you want to hear a Claire and Gunther story? To little Alexis or little Isaac. And so I thought when I was sitting down to write it, I didn't really know what I was writing. I wanted to write an adventure story, maybe for children, but it became something else altogether. So that was the very beginning. And I think with a little bit more time, I think a lot of people did this during COVID and kind of post-COVID, where I decided to kind of buckle down and write the whole story. It had a different name. It wasn't necessarily about mycelial networks and mushrooms at the time, although the natural world was always a big part of it. But there's also part of the origin is from my own childhood. So it's kind of like a mix of both.
Okay, so I have a theory about people who write reviews about fiction, and that also includes people who write books about fiction, including fiction on television, that they're really fiction writers, but they just haven't made that leap yet into actually writing fiction. So when you were writing Literary Lost and you were loving that series, like most sentient beings on this planet were, were you thinking then, wow, I want to do this also? And it also occurs to me, if you think about Fringe, it seemed to me from the moment I began reading Song of the Unsung Mushroom, it almost could have been an episode or many episodes on Fringe. So did it go back that far, this idea for this book about mushrooms blending in with the human genome and producing God knows what?
Sure that Walter was the kind of the crazy doctor on Fringe,
Right.
has a lot to do with this, kind of the inspiration for that. Because I will say that I was not a hardcore science fiction fan growing up by any means. go-to was coming of age fiction, but it was Lost and Fringe that kind of inspired me. And obviously the writing of Literary Lost, where I had to like read every single book that was featured in Lost. The Island of Dr. Moreau, for instance, was one of my favorites. Um, some of these that I had never really read or I hadn't read to completion before or watched, I really started getting into. And that's where I kind of got interested in science fiction. I was always a Kurt Vonnegut fan. But at that time, I think Battlestar Galactica was coming out. Yeah, Fringe was one of our favorites. Alexis loves Fringe too. But I think it was around the time, I would say 2019, 2020, there was a lot of research coming out about um, mycelial networks and the trees talking to the mycelial network, talking to the mushrooms. And then there was also research coming out about how psilocybin mushrooms and other plant medicine was treating things like depression and addiction. And that caught my imagination, the fact that these plants can teach us things. So with my kind of background in science fiction, writing about science fiction, which, like you said, you get inspired by these stories. Um, I felt like this was if ever I had a specialty in science fiction, this is what really sparked my imagination because it felt so organic. It was more true to me, who's very much a nature girl. I like to be outside. As much as I love literature, I probably love trees more. So I thought, when I read, there's a book by Merlin Sheldrake called Entangled Life, and he's a mycologist and a botanist. But he has this literary sense. He every chapter opens with um, some beautiful quote or another. And so when I read his book and his new research about the mycelial network, that's when it kind of started. And then there was like Fantastic Fungi, which is a documentary that became very popular. I think there was a book called The Mushroom at the End of the World. But yeah, so there was this sense of inspiration from Lost, and probably even I've thought of this more recently, Stranger Things. So I was watching Stranger Things. I watched it, with my son, and later on Alexis and Isaac and I all watched it. And as I was rereading it this summer, Paul, when we were working on the proof, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize this, but Stranger Things definitely snuck in there many times.
Well, I can definitely see that. By the way, so the scientist's name in Fringe was what? Walter?
Walter.
Walter?
Walter, what was his last name, Alexis? Do you remember?
Bishop. Walter
Walter
Bishop.
Bishop. Yeah.
Right. And he's played by a guy, I think like a Russian guy or something or other, but I don't know. I can't remember
Who,
his.
the actor? I think
Yeah,
the actor he's either British or Australian. He was like a stage actor. He's a wonderful,
yeah.
because he was in Lord of the
Lord of the
Rings as
Rings.
well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's close to Russian, right? I mean, it's closer than we
Yep.
are. But Jonathan, let me ask you, when did Sarah begin talking to you about this? Because I mean, poor Tina, she hears about, every single story I wrote and didn't wrote until by the time they get published, if they do get published, she's already sick and tired of the story because she's been hearing me talk about it so long. But Jonathan, was this something relatively new to you? So when you picked up the novel and read it, which I hope you did, it was the first time, or is this something that you were aware of as it was being developed?
It's a great question. I think the first time that I heard about it was early in our relationship. We met in fall of 2022, I believe, and we were talking about different things and getting to know each other. And it came out that she had written the novel and hadn't fully finished it, but it was out there. And so I became aware of it then, and it just was always something that was kind of back pocket, something that she wasn't focused on because she was focused on so many other parts of her life. And then I don't know, babe, if it was a year ago or so that you really started digging in, but there was a point somewhere within the last year where a decision was made that I think I want to finish this. And the amount of work that we put in over the course of the summer, and then especially here at the end with the audiobook reading and all the rest of it, it was just so tremendous. And I got little bits and pieces of it, but I didn't have the whole story. I didn't have much of the story until I listened to the audiobook when it came out. And it was really, really thrilling to hear. Um, yeah, I was really excited by it.
Yeah, we think the audiobook is fabulous, by the way, and so do the people that listen and live. And I don't mind giving Listen and Live a shout out. They are a very intelligently run operation. And I first got to meet that company, and Alfred, the person who is head of the company, uh, pretty much about 23, 24 years ago, when one of my novelettes, The Chronology Protection Case, was put on as a play, and we had an audio recording of it. And the next thing I knew, somehow Listen and Live found out about it and published that as an audiobook. So we actually go back a long way. And they were thrilled when I told them, hey, I have something really special for you, brand new novel by an author you don't know. And I don't know if anyone has gone to their page. It's listenandlive.com, just the way it spelled, just the way the words would be spelled. And they have, I always forget whether it's 6 or 8 books on the front page. And Sarah, Song of the Unsung Mushroom, your audiobook is on the front page.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, they have like some lunatic other book there. Like I think it's about some kind of schizophrenic serial killer or something.
Wow.
Yeah, so you're in good company.
Mushrooms and schizophrenics.
Yeah,
Tried the mushrooms.
that's right. They try too many of the mushrooms. Um, Sarah, as everyone here in our audience, and in maybe 15, 20 minutes, we'll open up the discussion to questions from the audience. But as I'm sure everyone in the audience knows, Sarah is also in the academic world. And so I have that in common with Sarah also. So I'm wondering what kind of reaction, Sarah, you got from your students. I mean, I have a problem if I tell my students, I'm a science fiction writer. And they say, oh, what kind of science fiction do you write? And I say, well, like Isaac Asimov, maybe 1 out of 30 of them will even know who he is. But you might have had better luck in your classroom. Have you talked to your students about Song of the Unsung Mushroom?
I teach a literature course. I teach mostly writing courses, and those students, typically are probably less, or they're more underprepared than your students, Paul. But my literature classes, the students are very excited. In fact, I was just talking to a student from last semester, and he was going to join tonight, but uh, they're very excited, but they don't, the literature class that I teach is an introduction to literature class. And so right now we're reading 1984. And, one of the things we're reading 1984, and because we're doing this college read around of Jurassic Park for some reason, we've adopted that as well by Michael Crichton. But it's been an interesting semester, both last semester and this semester, because I've been kind of weaving in, kind of some insight about writing science into fiction. And I will be doing a workshop this semester in March with all students. It's open to all students and faculty. And it's called Writing Science into Fiction. What did Michael Crichton know about paleobiology anyway? Something like that, some long subtitle. But it's been really interesting to parse out what Crichton knew at the time, because he published that book in, I think, 1990. Um, and he did get a lot of things right, and a lot of things were happening in the world. Before this, not a lot of people knew as much about dinosaurs as we do. So we didn't have that connection that, they were more like birds. And until, he kind of like popularized it, or he helped popularize it. But there are a lot of things that he got wrong. And then, if you've ever read Jurassic Park instead of just watch the movie, he's very heavy-handed in not only the science, but also, and Jonathan and I have talked about this, he's pretty preachy in there. So you hear his voice about like what humans should do about the natural world, what our part is and what our part isn't. So that's been a really interesting conversation because it's not, I wouldn't say it's the best book, but we read other examples of good fiction and good literature, and then we read that. We're like, what's popular fiction? And then, what is the science and what was mostly speculative? And that's been really interesting for me to be able to talk about, like, there are things that inspired me when it came to the science, the mushroom science, the mycology, and there are things that I know do not exist in the world yet, but could. And that's kind of where, and I tried not to be too heavy-handed with the science, especially in parts where I wanted it to be a little bit more magical and speculative. It's like, well, we have not identified something like, I think Merlin Sheldrake says 90% of the world's mushrooms. We haven't really identified and defined them and figured out, where they might fit in the medicinal world. And so to me, that was like, this I don't know, it just served as such an inspiration for like, well, we have penicillin and we have psilocybin that's curing depression, and what could fungal intelligence do? And that's kind of where I went with it, knowing that I'm a novice when it comes to mycology. And so trying not to be too specific in certain places.
Well, sometimes being a novice is a good thing, especially if you're a fiction writer, because you're not burdened by thinking, well, I'm not going to do this because maybe it's not thoroughly vetted. Maybe, the science is not 100%. But that's actually, I think, a good way to start a science fiction story. There is, of course, a tradition. I mentioned Isaac Asimov. He was a biochemist. And interestingly, though, he didn't bring much, if any, biochemistry into his work. So he wrote a lot of stories about robots, and he didn't know anything about robots. He didn't know anything really about artificial intelligence. Let me just ask you something while we're on this subject, though, of science and what we know. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this to you before. I don't know, about 3 or 4 years ago, and I can't remember the name of the author, unfortunately. Someone might remember the author of this. Somebody came out with an article. It was published in an online magazine called The Conversation. And I was really struck by the article. The gist of that article were that trees actually communicate to one another underneath the surface of the earth. They send out chemicals that go from the roots of one tree to another. And it really is, according to this theory. I don't think every single scientist who has studied trees, every botanist agrees with it, but some people do. According to this theory, they are literally able to warn other trees that if they send out a slightly different chemical, it means it's like extremely windy. I don't know what the tree is supposed to do. I mean, it can't warn another tree that there's a snowstorm unless there's something a tree can do to protect itself in a snowstorm. But when I first read that, I thought of Lord of the Rings and the Ents, intelligent trees. But your notion of what mushrooms can do is tied into what trees can do. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the trees in your novel and the trees, for that matter, in your life. I will say, I mean, trees are very important. They last a long time, and you know, getting back, to Tina and Molly, one of the first things we noticed when we moved from the Bronx up to White Plains, God knows how many years ago, was we had this great tree in the backyard. Fortunately, we lasted longer than the tree. It was some kind of southern tree, right? Does anybody remember what that tree was in the
Um,
backyard?
Magnolia.
Magnolia tree, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a beautiful
It was
magnolia
beautiful.
tree. Yeah, and I even tried to, like, Molly wanted us to, to put a hammock in, but there was really no easy way to attach it. And unfortunately, the tree sadly passed away because they don't live that long.
I
And
don't know how long it was there before we bought the house. So
That's true.
I wanted to say something about mushrooms and trees. I know this is not your demographic, it's not the target audience, but a few weeks ago, actually Molly made a lovely brunch for my birthday, and our grandsons were there, and the 6-year-old, who has a very creative mind, was found a little toy or something that looked like a mushroom, and he was dancing around calling himself Mushroom Man. He made up a whole song. And I said, "Oh, mushrooms! Let me show you something." Because this actually looked something like Alexis's picture with it, like the top mushroom.
Mhm.
So I pulled up a picture, the cover of your book on my phone, and I said, "Grandpa and I are just coming out with this book," and he was very, very interested. And I think Paul, I think maybe you asked him something like, "What does he know about mushrooms?" And the 6-year-old just like burst out with all this stuff about me. I didn't get half of what he said about how mushrooms do communicate and tree. Oh yes, trees can communicate and this whole thing. So we said, it's probably a little too early for him to read that. He could read the words, but I probably not appropriate for him yet. But there will come a time when Julian will be reading this book because he's very interested. So
It's amazing.
yeah,
Jonathan and I have a friend who just came out with his first book, and it's for children. It's a story. So maybe Dustin could illustrate a book for 6-year-olds, Jonathan.
Sure,
His
it'd
book
be
is called
interesting.
Octavio, and it's about an octopus. And I feel like there is some sort of kindred spirit there in terms of like the intelligence of octopuses and the intelligence of mushrooms. But that's amazing, Tina.
it was very funny.
By
I
the
was
way,
so
Oh,
sorry
yeah.
afterward that I didn't film it. I should have. And I don't know if I could try another time. Just ask him to tell me about mushrooms, and he would do it. But I don't.
Yeah, totally. You should. And we can
Yeah,
make a little reel.
right.
by the way, so is the plural of octopus octopuses or octopi? I
I
don't.
think
I,
that's
I
it.
mean, I just checked with Dustin, our resident expert. I think you can say either. I think there's actually
Yeah.
3 different ways to say it, but octopus is one of the correct ways. Yeah.
Okay, what are the other two ways?
Octopi, I think.
Right. So what's
And
the third
I'm not even going to
Oaths,
venture to
perhaps.
say what the third one is. What do you think, Jonathan?
one? Occupy.
Octopodes, if possible.
Octopus.
Octopi. That's not bad.
Well, it
How
could be
about
like sheep. It
octopodes?
could be just octopus, like sheep and
Sure.
sheep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like deer, like moose.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Sarah, I'm interested in your answer to the tree question, though,
Oh
and
yeah, back
the
to the tree.
communication.
So first of all, magnolia trees are wonderful climbing trees. I do have a long history with trees, which I think is apparent from the book. I do remember there was a magnolia tree in my grandmother's backyard, and I remember climbing to the top of that tree, and I could see them on the they on the second floor. I could see my grandmother and my mom. They were looking at me, and I was, I was just at the very top of the tree. But we also had, I think it was like a sweet gum tree in our backyard. And I do have an early memory of me and my best friend Carla talking to trees, or we're like, do you think you can actually talk to trees? And, we had some imaginary conversations, um, or maybe not so much imaginary. In terms of like what is called the mycorrhizal highways or pathways, which just means the pathways between trees and mushrooms underground. It's so rich in the research that is coming out is so interesting. Like for instance, with beech trees, they've learned recently that they support one another, and they using the mushroom network, or the mycelium underneath, they kind of create an equality in their beech tree community by figuring out who has enough sugars and lipids in each of the trees. And so the trees, and this is like if trees are growing naturally, not so much farm trees, because a lot of times the farm trees, they're taking off these, they're trying to create space for the biggest trees. But in natural spaces, they equalize one another and make sure that they all have enough of the same kind of energy. And it's mycelium that does that. Recently on a podcast, I heard a mycologist say that, millions of years ago, before there were roots, and this could be longer than that. I don't know. I don't know about the numbers here. There, before there were tree roots, there was mycelium. And so, and this kind of blew my mind just because I'm a mushroom nerd, that it was the mycelium itself that almost created the idea for the trees to create their own roots. So they've always been there. They've always been there supporting the trees and helping the trees communicate before the trees even had roots of their own. So the fungal network of different types of mushrooms, different types of fungus is really everywhere in our world. It's within the leaves of a plant. It's in our gut. It's everywhere. But specifically the mycorrhizal networks, that fungi that we don't really even see the mushrooms of necessarily because they're almost all underground. They're always working to kind of keep these plants healthy. And it's interesting, all the farming methods that we do, we have all these antifungals and all these fertilizers that kind of kill the system, or we have these potted plants that don't have access to that fungus. So yeah, I could talk about this all night and I won't.
No, it's wonderful. You're right. The poor potted plants, it's like they've been punished. It's like they were put in prison
I know.
just to make us happy. We're cruel human beings.
And we're like, why don't you grow? And it's because they don't have, they don't have their
right, because
neighbors.
they're very. That's why, by the way, as well as we'll turn this into, I'll put the title of this, a conversation with Sarah Clarke Stuart about her novel and some information about plants in our world that you may not know before. That'll probably attract a lot of views. But no, it's a very, very interesting thing. We human beings tend to look down on anything that's not exactly like us. So we're to some extent primed to look for intelligence in chimps and great apes and orangutans because they look something like us. So it's not that much of a leap. But when someone says, wow, dolphins are almost as intelligent, wow, that sounds insane. And when someone says, well, guess what? Trees actually act in what we would have to call an intelligent way, as you just described. That seems just completely, science fiction or out of the question. But I think the truth is we don't know much at all about the world and how these various forms of life emerged, why some survived, why some didn't. And I think your book, your novel, makes a very important contribution to that. And here I just want to add also to get back to, you and I being professors and, the relationship between the teacher and, the novel and the author. I think there's a lot that people can learn about the role of trees and their relationship to us just by reading your novel. So if you want to get educated, by all means, take a course in botany and so on and get some nonfiction books. But fiction is in many ways the best way to learn about things. I don't know how many of you heard of a professor by the name of Marvin Minsky, and I can't remember whether he was at MIT or Harvard, but he was in one of those two universities in Boston, and he's no longer with us. But he is on record as saying that yeah, it was MIT. He was someone who did a lot of work in AI, back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and he's on record as saying he learned more about AI from reading Isaac Asimov's robot novels than from any nonfiction book about AI. And yeah, for that matter, Paul Krugman, who's a Nobel laureate economist, he says the same thing about Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, the written series, not the series on television, that series is what educated him to the importance of economics and how to think about the world in an economic way. So I think that's an important point, for everyone to keep in mind. I want to switch to another thing, which I'm sure you'll be excited to talk about. And we've talked a little bit about this, in the past 3 or 4 months. Tina and I certainly, for whatever it's worth, think that Song of the Unsung Mushroom would make a great movie or a television series. We'll take either happily. So, if that happy day comes along, who would you like to star as Claire, as Gunther, as some of these other characters in your novel?
What an interesting question. I wish you had told me this earlier. I would have thought about it a little bit more. But I do have a good answer for Claire, because I thought about this, back in the day, like when I first started. And this probably would not be an actress that would play her now, but I think of a young Brie Larson as Claire. Like that's how I picture her. Maybe a little bit. I think Claire is a little bit more intense than Brie Larson, who's, she plays Captain Marvel. But that's who I always thought of for whatever reason. As far as Gunther, we just saw Hamnet the other day. And again, this would not be the same actor, but whoever played Shakespeare, I don't know the name of, is it Paul? Paul something. I feel like he kind of looks like what I imagine Gunther to look like as a young adult, not as a child. So yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, I can definitely see it as a series, and I think maybe there is something about, the way that we consume stories these days, especially since I was so influenced by Lost, and I love, obviously, I love television, science fiction television. The way that we think, I wonder, as novelists or authors, we write our scenes that way. And so, as much as I never really considered it, like, oh yeah, I want this, primarily, I'm writing this to, become a movie someday. I do think that I think in scenes in that way, and I do think that I've been influenced. But yeah, Brie Larson is definitely what I think Claire looks like.
Oh, that's good. I've had now, I mean, the plot to save Socrates, one of my early novels. I've been thinking about if a movie or a series is made of that, who should play who. And, Sierra Waters is the main, hero, in that trilogy. And unfortunately, so far there've been a couple of scripts that have been written, but none of them have yet been turned into movies. But the people I envisioned, like back in 2002, 2003, they're too old now to play,
Yeah.
replacing the actress. If
Yeah.
only the filmmaking industry would wake up, there would be a good part there.
Yeah.
For
There will
somebody.
always be more actors and actresses.
Yeah. Well, I think, what you just said, about when you wrote, you write in a scenic way, that is, you think of these scenes. Maybe think of something else, at least about the way I write, and I wonder if you write this way. I never write from an outline or a plan. And people always ask me whenever I'm starting any book, well, what's your plan? Where are you going with it? And I say, I don't know. I haven't written it yet. And so to me, it's when I'm writing, like these scenes, these ideas come to me. And, most of the time it works out. And if it does work out, I finish it. If it doesn't work out, I put the work aside until maybe I'll go back to it a month or a year or even a decade later. So, my question to you about this, did you know when you were writing Song of the Unsung Mushroom that you were going to end it in a certain way or this and that would happen? And I don't want to talk too specifically about what happens in the novel because I'm sure the millions of people who are watching this video or listening to it won't yet have read it, and I don't want to spoil it for them. So without being too specific, there are some great changes and surprises that take place, in the story. Did you have those in mind when you started, or you were just writing and then as it came along, you just put it in there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not a planner, as Jonathan knows, in life or in fiction. Um, I think at a certain point I was trying to control it a little bit, and I was thinking maybe this is a trilogy with short. I wanted it to be shorter, the first one, and then have, and it was kind of growing too big. Um, I when I write, I'm kind of like you, Paul, where it's like if it works, then I'll just follow it and I will finish it, and if it doesn't, which usually it doesn't, then I won't. Um, I do love a good resolution though, whether it's the end of the first, in a series. I do like an emotional resolution. So that's important to me. And I think I did that in this book. Um, but no, I didn't know where it was going at all.
I think that's one of the reasons why it's so good. All right. Last question, then we'll get to some questions from our uh, audience. And the last question has to do with where you see this going from here. Are you planning on doing a sequel novel? Do you want to work on something else completely different? Where do you come down on that? Or maybe not at all. Maybe you want to write a nonfiction book next.
I mean, I absolutely have a start of another novel that's unrelated. However, I have a lot of, if you've read the novel, there's still potential. I mean, I feel like there's business left undone. So, it could go, and there are places to explore in that novel that I wouldn't mind digging into. I don't know if I'd call it a sequel, or I love the way that authors like kind of like Lois Lowry and other authors where they create another book in that world. So that may be a possibility. There's also a possibility of doing a prequel, which I'm really interested in. Josh and Jessica, who are the parents of Claire and Gunther, which, by the way, before I forget about it, I want to mention, because Bud Gundy is here and Susan Gundy, who is Susan Clarke now, Claire and Gunther are Clarke and Gundy. So my maiden name is Clarke and my mom's maiden name is Gundy. So it's kind of based on Clarke and Gundy. And that's where those names originally came from. Just fun little fact. But I do have a completely different novel kind of in the works.
All right. Our listeners should know that Sarah Clarke Stuart, the author of this novel, I don't know, has like about 24 names actually.
I do. I like gathering, like I like collecting names, you know. So I'm Sarah Oakes. That's my married name, my new married name. Clarke is my maiden name, and Stuart is my children's name. That's how I like to think of it. So I like all of the names.
It's very sweet. Actually, I do have one more question, even though I said that would be the last question. And this question concerns actually just one last question about the writing process. So I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you before, but I have never attended like a writing group in my life.
Okay.
Earl Stanley Gardner once said, about editors, if you have any advice for me, write it on the back of the goddamn check that you're sending me because you're buying the novel or the story, which I always thought was great advice. He was a great writer. He wrote the Perry Mason stories. So, because of that, the only human beings, these poor human beings who are burdened with this, who read what I write are Tina, my wife, Molly, our daughter, and Simon, our son. Now, I can't guarantee that Simon doesn't show it to his wife, Sarah Seltzer, who, by the way, wrote a great novel herself called The Singer Sisters. So, we're a very literary family. So, my question to you is, Jonathan has already told us that I guess he wasn't permitted to read it, or maybe he didn't want to read it. I don't know. I don't want to ask, until pretty recently. So, who then, if anyone, did you share the work in progress as you were writing it? And if it's something personal, I promise I'll cut it out of the video. No,
So I did have some friends who read some drafts of it. I never made Jonathan read it. He wanted to listen to the audiobook after after I shut myself away for a month recording it. He thought he should probably read it. And I was really surprised at how much he liked it. He would be listening to it and he said, "Oh my gosh," because Jonathan is, well, he's read a lot of science fiction, a lot of fantasy. And so I feel like he was, a very I felt like he would be a good critic, but maybe also it would be I don't know. I just never I didn't think it was his kind of science fiction. I feel like he's more of an old school kind of science fiction guy. So I didn't, want to burden him with that in our new relationship. I didn't want to say, "Hey, do you like this? Do you not like this?" So I was really pleased when he said he liked it. But yes, I did have some friends who read, different versions of it, but mostly it was the first part of it. So there's three different parts to it. Um, and a lot of it was just that character building and not so much the science fiction, the, hardcore science of it. Um, yeah, and I have a friend who I actually invited him here tonight. He wasn't able to make it, but he read the first version and he was very, very supportive. Also, Jen Hale, who I have to, kind of shout out to Jen. She was my editor for that Fringe book that I wrote. So she was working for ECW out of Toronto. And I reached out to her. She had just left ECW. She was working on her own. And she read this when it wasn't called Song of the Unsung Mushroom. It had a different name. And she was very supportive. She loved it. And she said, keep going. And so, yeah, that was another early reader before it became what it is.
Well, I think it is important to have a couple of readers. And, Tina does a very good job. I know when something I write is really good because Tina said, "Oh, this is really good." But she doesn't say that about everything that I give her. So, that gives me an indication that maybe I need to work on, something a little more.
But I do want to add one more thing because
Right.
Chrissy's here. So I'm kind of like you. Like, I don't really like writers groups. And I remember being in college and I remember thinking, I don't really like writers. But recently I have found this Women Writing for a Change organization. Jennifer Wolf runs it in Jacksonville. And it's all women and it's been wonderful. So it's this one, and that's where I sent you a picture. That was where I did my first reading, before the novel was published last fall. So I do want to give a shout out to my friends there because they've been super supportive.
That's great.
Thank you,
But
Chryssi.
yeah, speaking of shout outs, I want to give a shout out to Jim Morrison, not the Jim Morrison of the Doors, who doesn't need me to give him a shout out. He was great. This is Jim.
How much these days?
Yeah, unfortunately, Jim Morrison. Who's why I'm mentioning this? Yeah, because I want him to watch this video. Uh, Jim Morrison did a lot of work in the media ecology field, which is where I got my PhD years ago. He wasn't in the same program as me, but back then we got to know him because he came to, the media ecology yearly conferences. And what I didn't know, because I'd been out of touch with him for a while, is that he moved down to Jacksonville. And I found out about it because you started a new authors page on Facebook, and obviously I knew you lived in Jacksonville, and Facebook helpfully just put like a note on my screen saying, your friend Jim Morrison lives in Jacksonville. And my first was probably not the same Jim Morrison, but it was. So at some point he may show up at a reading. He's a very nice guy.
Good to know.
Yeah, he's a good guy to have.
I was wondering why the mutual friends were you and just kind of a handful of people in Jacksonville. It didn't line up. So thank you for I did notice him. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's a good guy. I mean,
Yeah, I look forward to meeting him.
yeah, sometimes people take a turn for the worse, and maybe he's not a good guy anymore. But at least 10 years ago, he was a good guy.
Okay.
No, Jim,
Okay.
I'm sure you're still a good guy.
Good to know.
For him.
All right, listen, how about some questions from the audience? I mean, all of you know Sarah much better than I do. So let me, with the exception, I guess, of Molly, but Molly knows Sarah somewhat because we talk a lot about Sarah and her work. So you can either actually ask a question or make a comment or add something to what we were just talking about. So in other words, you can say, I just want to make this point. What Sarah said before about trees, that's not true at all. She never paid even the slightest bit of attention to trees. Something like that, something provocative that, when I basically try to promote this video and audio, I'll put up, something saying, see some of what Sarah's friends are saying about her novel.
Yeah, please, some controversy.
That's right.
I'll give you a couple of comments.
Go ahead.
So I think that the most impressive thing about the novel for me is the emotional heft. And I'm interested in how you do this with intentionality. I remember by the end of the first part, I very strongly resonated with one character and strongly disliked another character. I mean, there was emotion to it. And then there's a moment and it's like, oh, my throat caught a little bit. And then as we move forward from there, I found myself really emotionally connected to the characters throughout the rest of the book. And so the things that they would go through were meaningful. And so I'm definitely interested in hearing you talk a little bit about how you accomplished that. The other thing that I would say is that I've had the most wonderful opportunity to brag about you in all different quarters of my world, um, because it's really fun when somebody that you love does something special, but it's especially amazing when this thing that they've done is actually excellent. And so you're always going to be supportive, but when you really get to say, look at what this person I love has done, this is incredible, and you should all pay attention to it. That's a really awesome experience.
Yeah, I mean, that has been the biggest surprise of all, I think, that I can share it with you. And not only do I feel, Jonathan, like, do I feel like you know me better, but just like the fact that you appreciate it is, I don't know, that I couldn't have asked for anything more because what you are talking about, like the character development, I think that's where all the labor goes in. Like that's the hard part. That's the part that AI will, I mean, I hope will never be able to do because that actually took 20 years, right? Like Claire and Gunther are at least, I mean, they're about 20 years old, I would say, maybe 18, 19 years old. And I think that's what you're feeling, and that just takes a lot of time. So I'm glad that you acknowledge that, like could see that, could feel that by the end of part one, which part one is all Gunther. And I was thinking about this earlier because, we were talking, me and Jonathan were talking about like who is Gunther really? Like Gunther's not my little brother necessarily, although it is based on my experience with having a little brother for sure. And he's not my son necessarily, but it's based on my experience of having a son. So, and I think it's also just based on experience of having, friends, whereas like that character was not developed very much at all when I was telling this story to my daughter because Claire was the main character, the little girl was the main character. But I think having a child of the opposite sex kind of definitely, helps you see into that world a little bit more. And I think, it can be a challenge writing characters of the opposite sex sometimes. But I think that character, although he's not John, my younger brother, he's not my son, but I feel like over the years I was able to learn a little bit more about that experience and maybe be able to write from that perspective.
That's a great question and a great answer. Um, so Susan has actually a very good question, which I'm sure some of our viewers and listeners are interested in your answer to this, Sarah. What was your first intended title for this book?
That is a great question. And I'm glad that you are enjoying my reading, my audiobook. So the first title and the only other title was Open Your Wings and Speak. And it was inspired by a Counting Crows song, actually. So I remember coming up with these like preliminary stories. I was listening to a lot of Counting Crows. Um, I'm forgetting what is his name, Jonathan, the songwriter?
Adam Duritz.
Adam Duritz, yeah. Um, and it was based on just the imagery that and the idea of kind of being able to open up and be vulnerable. So it was called Open Your Wings and Speak. And it was kind of that it was inspired more by birds actually in the natural world than trees and mushrooms.
And you want to tell us a little bit more about the evolution of the title from that first title to what the title eventually became?
That's true. I'm sorry. There was another iteration. After that, it became Prayer of the Unsung Mushroom because by the time I finished it, it took a it took a spiritual turn where there's a little bit of spirituality in there. Like it's almost like within the fiction, of course I had to create a cult. Everyone who knows me knows that I'm obsessed with cults. So there's a little bit of spirituality in there, and there is some, um, it's really the hybrid who is um, that kind of artificial intelligence that the changeling of Claire, who replaces Claire. I don't think there's any spoilers because that's kind of in my summary. Um, who is really, really close to nature, and it's really her story. And her perspective that interests me the most. But to me, she, being close to nature, at least at that time in my life as a writer, felt like the most spiritual thing. And so it was called Prayer of the Unsung Mushroom until Paul and Tina came along and said, hey, Song of the Unsung Mushroom is, there's kind of that alliterative vibe to it. And also, I think it was the word prayer may not do well, in our algorithms and search engines. It may feel like it skews a little bit religious, which I appreciated, and I love the title now.
Yeah, well, I think, there's an interesting question as to what role the title has. And it's a very interesting question, I always thought, because on the one hand, it's all important because it's what attracts the reader in the first place. And if there's something about a title that doesn't attract the reader or attracts the reader for the wrong reason, so you're setting them up to be disappointed, you don't want that in a title. But the interesting thing about titles is once someone begins reading the book, they don't even look back at the title anymore. They're
True. Yeah.
so it's like at the doorway. And you do want an attractive doorway. You don't want people to be using like the lame metaphor of you're walking down a block and you see you're passing a bunch of individual houses. Which house do you knock on the door and say, hi, I want to come in and get to know you? So in that sense, it's all important. But at the same time, it's hardly important at all, because once you're inside the house, most people don't think that much about the title. But it's always good, I think, to have in the title a sort of contradiction, and that in itself is attractive. People are wondering, what is this that's both A and B at the same time, or A and Z at the same time? Song and unsung. Hold on a second. For those of you who are listening, I'm just admitting someone over and over again to the chat, because one of the things, by the way, about Zoom is that it's very, very finicky and tends to knock people off. Chryssi actually put something in the chat. Let me just read it. It's not really a question, but I think the world would be interested in that. Chryssi writes, I love the emerging knowledge about mycology, and I can't wait to read it, the book. So that's encouraging, and I hope everyone will take that to heart. Let me actually ask either Bud or Edwin, both of whom were generous enough to write blurbs, what they really thought of the book. Now that we have, I'm sure they both liked it, but what did you, or loved it, what did you especially find attractive and important about this novel?
Well, I mean, I can say that it was like such a unique story. It had such a unique foundation too, and I thought that that was really interesting. And I love stories like about nature and trees. I think you were thinking of The Overstory, which won the Pulitzer several years ago, which was an amazing book, all about trees. And Sarah, I just have to tell you that I was kind of surprised when you said you don't really know much about mycology, or maybe you said it a little differently, because that was not the impression that I got. I mean, you certainly seemed authoritative and expert on it. So I think you did a very good job there. Also, I just was wondering, just a technical question, where did you record your audio version? Did you do that at a little studio or in your house, or?
So you may not know this, but my husband, Jonathan Oakes, is a podcaster. He has
okay.
One of the biggest trivia podcasts in the world.
Oh, awesome.
So he is, and he's also an audio nerd, and he listened to some of the first chapters that I recorded, which I was just kind of practicing, and he was like, this sounds good, but it doesn't sound professional. So he hooked me up with his little studio. I'm in it now, so we kind of share this space here, where he records his podcast episodes every other week. And so I got to use his fancy computer and his fancy microphone.
Awesome.
Yeah, so he helped me with that. I couldn't have done it otherwise. I mean, I did talk to a local group who records audiobooks, about doing it, but when I thought about it, we just didn't have enough time if we wanted to release it when we released the print and the ebook, which when it came down to it and I showed Tina and Paul some samples, they were like, yeah, that sounds good. You should definitely record it. And so I thought, oh, okay, I have the winter break. Let's see what we can do. And so I just kind of decided that I would spend 7 days a week doing that for my winter break. But thank you so much. I really enjoy. I rarely, for fun, read fiction anymore. I read a lot of nonfiction, but I did, read The Overstory. Loved it. Really enjoyed it, and I just kind of I've spent a lot of time with Paul Stamets and Merlin Sheldrake and any mycologist I can find, just because when I get into something, I have to know everything about it. So thank you.
Tina, did you say something? I didn't.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt. I think it's about 12 hours. Listen lives page says that the book is 12 hours recorded. That's impressive. That's a long book. So
Mm-hmm.
you did a yeoman's job. You know, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I have listened to a lot of audiobooks. And I always prefer it, although I like to read. I really like to listen. I used to do it in my car when they had CDs. I would play a CD when we'd be driving up to Cape Cod, just a nice long drive. I listened to Hillary Clinton's book that way on CD in my car. And yeah, I had to pull over, literally had to pull over once because I was crying. But this is post November 2016. But I enjoy that because, you know, as much as I like reading, I enjoy hearing the book, but I really like it when it's the author reading his or her own book. I think that really brings an extra element. So, you know, we really love that you were able to do that. So
Thank you. I noticed today that two of my favorite authors, Michael Pollan and Merlin Sheldrake, who I've already mentioned like 3 times so far, they've been reading like their most recent Michael Pollan's book. He read himself. So but I would love to hear if Edwin, if you have any feedback from Paul's question.
Yeah, before I just
He's a
wanted to,
documentarian and an author himself.
yes, I just wanted to introduce Edwin so everybody knows actually how important and successful Edwin has been. Edwin produced a documentary about Ray Bradbury, generally recognized, and I got to meet him. I was, you know, way back in like 2001, before September 11th. I was president of the Science Fiction Writers of America, and we hold a yearly conference. And Ray Bradbury was supposed to speak at the conference, but he was doing a signing, and this all took place in Los Angeles. And he was so mobbed at the signing that basically he was 5 minutes late, 20 minutes late, 45 minutes late. We were calling, what's going on? Don't worry, don't worry. And finally, he got to the convention maybe about an hour and 15 minutes after the advertised time. And he must have been in his 70s then, and he basically was great. He had more energy than I had. He got up on the stage and he talked for another half an hour. And you had the honor and pleasure of doing a documentary with him, Evan. So congratulations about that.
I don't think we can hear your audio.
Yeah,
You're
I
not
can't hear you.
muted. You're not
You,
muted, but I don't know what input you're using.
oh, you couldn't hear me?
No, we can hear
Hear
you, Paul.
Edwin.
We can't
Oh,
hear Edwin.
yeah,
okay, your audio should be fine, Edwin. I mean, I would say you're not muted. We'll just give Edwin a minute or two.
is your computer muted?
Would need to
I
go
think
into
he's
your.
Okay,
working on it. Yeah.
you're okay now.
No, we can't
No,
hear
he's
him.
not. He might have to rejoin.
I do.
All right,
Can't
why
hear
don't
you.
you rejoin? Why don't you just leave and come back? I'll let you and see how that works.
And
So
Susan,
Edwin had to leave us for a minute or two. For those of you who are listening to this, we're just trying to give you an example of what happens when these mushrooms want to silence someone. They had an idea of what Edwin was going to say, and they somehow got into this.
Yeah.
All right,
It just started
Edwin,
growing. The fungal system is
yeah,
growing right into
Edwin
his.
is back.
Mhm.
there we go.
Okay, Edwin. Nope.
Oh, we can't hear you. Sorry.
All right.
You can type it if you have something to say.
Yeah.
No.
All right. All right. Well, folks, this is okay. Tina at least can talk. Go ahead.
I can still talk. No, I didn't have anything to say. It's okay.
You're raising your
Carry
hand.
on. Carry on.
Okay. All right. Well, listen. If you would like to know what Edwin Stepp thinks of Sarah's wonderful novel, we did something in case a problem like this had arisen. And we got Edwin to write a blurb about the novel. And if you go to the Amazon page where the novel is, you'll be able to read Edwin's blurb. Not only that, when you get a copy of the book, you'll be able to open it up, and right up front, there's a section which says what they're saying about Song of the Unsung Mushroom. And even though Zoom or some nefarious force has temporarily silenced Edwin, I mean, he's still alive and well. I mean, you'll be able to nonetheless read his thoughts in the actual copy of the book, or if you just want to go to Amazon's page.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
Go ahead.
Figured out a solution.
I was so sad because you have such a great voice.
And that was where I was going to start.
Yeah.
That's where I was going to start, was with your lovely voice. I've been a fan of your Life in This podcast. And I remember first hearing it, wow. And I haven't listened to the audiobook yet. I've read your book, but I haven't listened to the audiobook. But I'm like, whoa, this is, her voice is just magical. So anyway, I'll start there. But, you know, there's so much that I love about this book that I
He's gone. Your voice is, you're out.
The gremlins.
No, those trees are a merciless grove of trees. They silenced Edwin again.
Yeah, we can't hear you anymore.
He was about to say something incredibly profound.
I know. Tune in to next time.
Right, listen. This is okay. You know what? I was actually going to post the link to the book here, but I think everyone knows where the book is, how to get the book. Just go to Amazon, type in Song of the Unsung Mushroom, and you will get to a page where you'll be able to buy the book if you want in all 4 of these forms. You can get it instantly as a Kindle. You can get it instantly as an audio book. And then, of course, since paper has to travel, you know, it can't get anywhere instantly. It's subject to, you know, the physical laws of the universe. If you're interested in either a paperback or a hardcover, both of which really display beautifully Alexis's fabulous cover, you can get those there as well. So let me just give Zoom and Edwin one more chance.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. I think I figured out the problem, but I won't go into it. Anyway, so where did I leave off? Her beautiful voice.
Yes. Yes.
I read her book about Lost and literature when we first met, and it was fantastic. And then when I read this book, I'm like, wow, this is on the level of Lost. I also put it on the level of The Matrix, because it blew me away. I mean, it's so many things, and it reminded me of another
unbelievable. Okay.
We lost you again, Edwin.
Edwin.
But I can't wait to hear about it. I'm going to just have to call you after this because I'm like, what? What?
Who can we
Look, I have the Matrix.
I don't know. I think Tina said something a little earlier negative about Trump.
Now everyone froze.
Okay.
Back?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm back. Okay.
Yeah.
So another novel that it reminded me of was now it just slipped out of my head. The Japanese British author who wrote Remains of the Day.
Oh.
Is it Ishiguro?
Yeah, that's right. Ishiguro is his last name. And it was what was the novel that they had um, these people being raised to harvest their organs. Never
When I
Forget
just
Me.
read it. I just read it like this year, and I cannot remember
Yeah, I think
the
it's something like
title.
Never Forget Me. Anyway, I
Oh
won't
yeah,
go on
Never
that.
Let Me Go. It's
Never
Never
Let
Let
Me
Me Go.
Go. Never Let Me
Yes.
Go. I wondered if
Wow.
that was
Yeah.
some kind of influence on you, but probably not because you
It
just
wasn't
read it.
because I just read it.
Yeah, right. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, this novel just was mind-bending for me, and so I'm going to leave it there since we've taken up too much time with my audio problems. But it's fascinating, just brilliantly written, and the depths of the characters and everything are fantastic. So,
Thank you. Thank you so much,
congratulations.
Edwin. Thank you.
Congratulations.
I think I read I mean, and I've read Remains of the Day, but I read Never Let Me Go because I think someone told me that I should read it.
Yeah,
So
it's
yeah,
it's
you're not.
it's not right at the heart of what you wrote, but it's similar.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
Well,
but
thank you, Edwin.
I'm working with a very talented screenwriter now. So if you and Paul want to talk about rights,
All right. I love it. I
just
love
kidding.
it. What's next? Yeah.